Hi, welcome back to another episode of Learning to Turn with me, Beau Legouge. Today we'll be focusing on one operation, roughing down the side of the blanks to the round. The chief purpose of this step is to balance the blank. Until this piece has been turned down to a cylinder, it's out of balance, which introduces vibrations. Those vibrations increase with the speed of rotation, so you cannot safely increase the RPM to the desired speed for efficient cutting until the piece has been balanced. Because the blank is unbalanced, I'm using the tailstock even though the blank is now mounted securely on a chuck. With the tailstock in place, even if my recess mount fails somehow, this piece of wood cannot come off the lathe and hurt me or my dog. Once it's balanced, we'll be able to remove the tailstock, which is necessary for shaping cuts that are next up in the order of operation. Before we dive into the particulars for this cut, we should spend a couple minutes talking about another major safety consideration with turning, grain direction, and what it means for the types of cuts that are safe. I did not originally plan on covering this because, like I said in the long intro to the first episode, my purpose is limited to detailing the technique for the 8 types of cuts used to make a bowl and chronicling my efforts to master them. It's not my intention to teach you everything you need to know to start turning. But when I talked to Stuart, the first thing he said was, I don't see anything about safety. You really need to cover that, especially when it comes to grain direction. Well, this operation, cutting things down to the round, provides the perfect opportunity to get into that because it's the best example I know of where turners commonly perform exactly the same operations with both spindles and bowls, but the technique in each case is totally different, entirely because of the grain direction. Here's a spindle blank. You can kind of see the concentric growth rings here. This is the end grain, and all of this down the length of the piece is a side grain. As a turner, you can do just about anything you want with side grain and not get into trouble. Stuart jokes in one video that you could run across your shop with the biggest gouge you have and jam it into side grain, and the worst that would happen is that you'd tear out a chunk of wood. He didn't demonstrate that, and I'm not going to either, but his point stands. Side grain is very forgiving. End grain is evil, vindictive, and generally bad-tempered. If you point a tool uphill into end grain, you are guaranteed to get a catch. The end grain grabs the cutting edge and pulls it in. So if there's one cardinal rule in wood turning, it's never point an edge uphill into end grain. So let's see this in action with the very different techniques for turning a spindle blank and a bowl blank down to the round. The guiding principle here is that you peel side grain and slice end grain. Let's start with a spindle blank. I'm not going to dwell on the particulars for these cuts right now. I'll add some color commentary in the voiceover, and after this quick comparison, I'll circle back to give you the specifics for roughing down a bowl blank. Now let's cover the particulars for this operation of roughing down to the round. Foot position for this one is parallel to the bed. Left hand position, it's underhand with the thumb and fingers pulling down, canceling each other out. The tool is a large 40-40 bowl gouge. Tool rest height is standard below center with the tool on center for the blank. Tool rest distance, 1/2 inch, 3/4. That one doesn't matter too much for this cut. The vertical tool angle is standard, about 10 degrees. Horizontal tool angle is about 40 degrees, basically on the bevel. Flute angle is 930, so pretty well closed and facing towards me. The technique here, I'll keep both of my arms pinned against my body, so body contact throughout the operation. Vertical tool angle needs to be nearly flat so that as I push, it is the pressure is going straight into the wood. If you drop the handle, then the cutting angle is upwards and the tendency is to pull the tool along with the left hand. The main operation is simply a weight transfer from right to left. First pass will be a pretty light cut at lower lathe speed because it's out of balance. After that one, you can crank up the speed a little bit and make a fuller cut at higher speed. And then the third pass, a full cut at still higher speed. Be using what Stuart refers to as left hand braking at the end of the cut to avoid blowing out the wood fiber over on this back side as the tool comes through over here. And the main thing I need to really be careful of is not applying any pressure on the back side of the tool with my thumb, not pressing it into the wood. That's going to be critical with quite a few of the cuts here, but this is one because the blank is irregular at this point with voids, basically, that if I start pushing in, it's really going to beat me up with the tool dropping into the void and then bouncing back out again off of the high spots. So that's going to be a challenge to keep the thumb and the fingers counterbalancing each other so there's no pressure into the wood and it's simply gliding on the bevel. That's the goal anyway. Wish me luck. I'm going to drop a spoiler on you right out of the gate here, which is that this is going to be a rough ride. This operation and I did not get along for much of the pass through. I believe we have 19 blanks lined up here. And you'll see that a lot of it goes kind of like this. I'm taking off, I'd be surprised if it's a 1/16 of an inch, at most an 1/8 there. I'm getting dust, not shavings. The tool is going to be frequently bounced out of the groove where I have to start, move back and get reset. Clearly that's a sign that I'm doing something wrong, I think, which isn't too big a surprise since it's my first time really practicing this. But what was concerning was how long it took me to begin to get a better handle on it. Extending the spoiler, I do get there. I get to a point where something clicks and it starts to go much better for me. Pleased to report, because the first hour and a half or so of the 2 hours I practiced this was just plain torture. I'm not getting beaten up the way I've seen or heard about some people doing, where they're really coming at it completely the wrong way. So, I'm not making some of the really bad mistakes, but I'm just not getting decent results. I think a part of the problem may be the wood. This is some really old dry oak, and it's really hard, and with my technique not being up to snuff, it simply is not cooperating. It's not taking the tool, shall we say. And on blank 7, I think I have a little bit of confirmation of that.
we'll stop and take a look when things go a little bit better. But most of the first hour and a half of footage for this episode. But we are going to blaze through most of the first 90 minutes of footage I have of this operation because it's just too painful and not a lot for you guys to learn. So there we go, kicking it up to 5x. And just in case you think that suddenly I got better, no, that's just the increased speed we're watching it at. Keep an eye on the wood that's piling up on my wrist and how big a pass I'm able to take. Generally, you're going to find that that's somewhere in the 1/8 of an inch neighborhood. Maybe on a good pass, I get as much as a 1/4 inch. But a lot of little nibbles and a lot of going back and starting over. You can see my white knuckles there on the left hand as I'm pinching that tool and holding it down and trying to keep it from bouncing around. There, I even went overhand for a second, thinking that might be better. And of course, I'm trying to keep from putting any pressure on the tool with the left hand. I'm trying to keep it gliding, but also trying to keep it from bouncing around. You'll notice that at the end of many passes, I will move the tool rest like that, get a little bit closer so I'm not getting too much leverage out on the tool. And I'll also crank up the speed. So the thing there is that when you start off with one of these blinks that's not yet rounded down to the cylinder, you need to keep the speed down. It's out of balance, and the rule of thumb that I've heard is to get that initial speed at a safe level is to divide 6,000 by the diameter of the blank. So for a 6-inch blank, that would be 6,000 divided by 6 is 1,000 RPM. A 9-inch blank is, I believe it comes to 667 RPM. And of course this lathe, you can't really see it I guess, but this lathe only has 7 speeds that it can be set to, which is rather limiting. There's actually probably only about 3, maybe 4 of those that I use frequently. The slow speeds are too slow for turning stuff, at least the size that I'm working. If I were doing larger items, then I probably would use those speeds. And the top speed of 3,000 is just way too fast for bolt turning. That's pretty much only for spindles. So I'm restricted to a rather limited set of options when it comes to speed. This blank is a good one for talking about being out of round. You can see parts of it have gone white from taking wood off, and other parts are still yellow from the wood sealer. So this one was really out of round to start with. And so you start off with the rule is 6,000 divided by a diameter, and once you get it down to round, then you can take it to 9,000 divided by diameter. So a 9-inch bowl would be 1,000 RPMs. Now Stuart, he doesn't have a rule of thumb quite like that. He simply talks about turning at 40 miles an hour. Now, of course, that's for the speed of a blank once it's down to the round. But 40 miles an hour is considerably faster, almost 50% faster than the 9,000 divided by diameter rule. So whereas a 9-inch blank, you'd go 1,000 RPMs by the 9,000 rule. To achieve a speed at the circumference of 40 miles an hour moving past the tool, you'd have to take it up to 1500 RPM. So that's a significant difference, obviously, nearly a third, almost exactly a third faster, or 50% faster actually, going from 1000 to 1500. And of course, speed is a major factor in safety. Over a certain speed, the blank will go airborne if it comes off the lathe. And clearly Stuart is very intent on safety, and he focuses on that quite a bit. And so he must know that that for that purpose of the blank not going airborne, that the 40 mile an hour rule is safe. I suspect that a major part of his consideration is that he's talking about a blank that he knows is sound structurally. And I wouldn't be surprised if the 9,000 rule allows for the fact that a lot of hobbyists are turning wood that isn't necessarily structurally sound. The piece they grabbed out of the wood pile that has cracks in it, and those cracks are almost necessarily a source of structural instability and the potential for it simply to come apart on the lathe. Anyway, when I was shooting these videos, I'm not sure I'd even really heard about the 9,000 and 6,000 rules of thumb, and so I was using Stuart's guidance and aiming for the 40 miles an hour, of course, again, not at this point in the process, but once I had it down to the round, I was getting as close to 40 without going over as I could, given the rather severe limits of this lathe's speed settings. It strikes me that was a bit more of a detour on speed than I really intended. The point I really wanted to make is that when roughing out, you want to start at basically the slowest speed that you can cut at, because the piece is so out of round. And as you bring it down towards the cylinder, it's becoming more balanced, and you're reducing the circumference, so you can increase the speed with each pass. To put it in more concrete numbers, I would typically make the first pass or two at 600 RPMs and then crank it up a notch to 850. And once it had come down to a near cylinder, at that point I could crank it all the way up to about 1100, even 1500 for a smaller diameter piece. But it's definitely a progressive process. Start slow and bring it up gradually as the piece is more balanced and easier to work, less roughness to kick your tool around. We're going to be slowing the video down to real speed here to get a better look at my best pass yet. One thing to call out is that we're now working with olive. The last two blanks, in fact, 5 and 6, as well as this one, number 7, have been olive. You may have noticed that if you were attentive to the grain when the lathe wasn't running. But this is evidence, I think, that part of my problem with the first few blanks was the old dry oak. As I mentioned, I think in the first episode, this olive has only been cut for about 3 or 4 years, and isn't nearly as dry, and it works so much easier. Now, those first 2 blanks, I didn't really notice a difference, but look at this. I'm taking off a good clean 1/4 inch, getting some nice shavings. No change in my technique that I'm aware of. I attribute it almost entirely, if not entirely, to the difference in wood. And it felt good to finally have the tool making a serious dent in that. And I think one other difference may be just that I was more ambitious going into it. You could see that I basically took a bigger bite, and I'm beginning to think that that's actually what you want to do here is to, when you're rounding it down to the cylinder, you want to really take a big bite. If you're nibbling at it, I think it's harder to avoid getting beaten up and to keep the tool on the wood the way we want to. So you'll see that I didn't necessarily go right back to that. This one's not doing too bad. Back up to high speed, of course, here. But that's another decent deep cut. I believe we are still on the last piece of olive. But yeah, look at the shavings that are piling up on my wrist and my gut are they're decent. They're not just chips. They're actual shavings. As we switch to the high view here, one thing to call out that I did wrong. That tool rest you can see is a little farther away from the bed at the left than the right. That is, it's not parallel to the bed, and that's not correct. It should be as perfectly parallel as you can make it. It's not critical for these cuts because these aren't finishing cuts, but if I was intent on getting a good straight cut, having the tool rest at an angle is going to mess with that. Just like having your feet not parallel as you're doing your weight transfer, it makes it really hard to do a straight, clean cut. All right, we're back to oak here, and it looks like I might have learned a little something from working with the olive and the success I was having there. And you can see I'm taking a bigger bite here, even on the first pass. Maybe not quite a 1/4 inch, but certainly more than the nibbles I was taking on the earlier blanks. And having at least a little bit more luck with it, although maybe that wasn't the best time to call that out because I had a few abortive passes. But it does seem to be a case where more is better, and the wing of the gouge has no trouble peeling off the waste. The nose is doing the hard work by slicing through the end grain. And if you take the bigger bite, the wing will clear out, peel off the side grain that it's cutting through. Alright, we're about to slow down to regular speed again here as soon as we finish this blank. And I want you to pay attention to the next blank, the side view of it. I'm actually going to show you a freeze frame of it here and zoom in so you can get a look and give you a couple of seconds to see what you notice. Yeah, that's a crack, and it extends all the way across that blank right through the middle. And if you think about it, on the other side you have a chuck that it's expanded into a recess, meaning it's applying pressure that is working towards opening up that crack. Keep that in mind as I turn on the lathe here in a second. And it'll be no surprise what happens. But don't blink. Yeah. So that's one thing that can happen if you're using firewood on the lathe. Probably had the speed too high. I did turn the speed down just before I turned it on, you may have noticed, but that didn't help. So that thing just snapped in two, hardly any wood holding it together before I turned the lathe on, and just the centrifugal force of spinning it up was enough to tear it apart. Saving graces, I was following best practice. I see how I was stepped off to the side when I turned it on for this one. I was in that position for the last one as well. And you always want to do that when you're turning the lathe on, especially the first time, but pretty much any time you're spinning up the lathe, you want to do two things. You want to bring down the speed before you turn it on, and then ramp it back up again. I'm not real good about that one, but I'm pretty good about standing out of the plane of the blank, because if it's going to come off the lathe, it's going to move somewhere in the plane that it's spinning. There's really no way that it can go flying off to the side unless it bounces off of something. But directly off the lathe, the danger zone is in the plane that it is spinning in. So be sure to keep yourself out of that plane. So clearly I haven't figured it out entirely just yet. Again, we're on oak here, and I think we're going to find, I see you watched as I stepped away to sharpen the tool and got a little bit better result after coming back with a sharp gouge. That pass is decent, although I clearly keep skipping off. This one has a funky knot or something in the side that's probably a bit harder wood, so I'm more inclined to bounce me around. Yeah, that right there. Got a catch there. I must have gotten a little too cutting into that knot. The wing was biting basically into end grain, so it's no longer peeling side grain. Made it through okay on that second try. At this point, 11 blanks in, and I've been at it for about an hour and 15 minutes at this point. It occurs to me that about the only real change I've made is to go for a bigger bite, to try and take out a quarter inch or so at a go. And I really haven't been adjusting technique much as I've struggled, and it's been a struggle with this operation. Notice that the tool is still quite flat in the horizontal plane. The flute is still pretty closed. I think I was kind of scared to mess around with this, that you never point a gouge remotely uphill into a bowl blank, into where you're dealing with end grain. Kept me from getting a little bit more adventurous in trying to feel my way towards a better technique. That pass was a little bit better, but still, nothing fundamental going different. And pretty quickly here, that's going to change. So we're up to blank 13 now. And first couple passes here, same deal. I'm kind of nibbling away at it, skating across the surface. And we're going to bring it down to real speed and show one more pass with pretty much the same way of doing things. And you see I've gone into a split view where you can see both. And really no marked improvement here over my first few passes on blank number 1. Taken off at most a 1/16 of an inch. A lot of bouncing. You can really see that in the overhead view on the right. And then for the next pass, I made a change. I dropped the handle maybe an inch or so. And that's not going to be terribly evident in the video because neither of these angles really shows that change. But my right hand, where I'm holding the tool against my hip, I just dropped that a little bit. I honestly do not recall whether that was any kind of a conscious decision. That is, whether I decided to try messing with the angle of the tool. But you can see I was thrilled with the result. It actually started to slice. I suspect that the video doesn't really show enough of a difference. That is, that the change in angle really isn't evident. I actually created a couple of graphics showing the before and after position of the tool from both the side angle and the top angle, complete with lines drawn in showing the difference of the angles. And it was all so subtle, I can't imagine it would have helped you at all. Besides which, I'm not claiming that the new angle of attack I was using is exactly correct or would work in all circumstances. So the point really here is just that a pretty slight change in the tool position made a huge difference in the cutting performance. And the takeaway, I think, is that if you're struggling with an operation, with making a particular type of cut, don't be afraid to play with the variables. You know, we have several angles in play here, and you know, apart from certain cardinal rules like you don't point a blade uphill into end grain, you know, there's room for trying different things. Another change that I realized that I made at some point along the way also is the flute position. Notice it's not nearly as closed as it was earlier on. I'd guess that it's at 10, maybe 10:30. Every 5 minutes is about 30 degrees, so it's open by 30 to 60 degrees more than what I specified. And again, that's not to say that what I got from watching Stuart's videos to have it open at 9:30, that I was wrong in that. It's just, you know, maybe he was, because of the wood he was working with, or just his skill level, that angle worked for him. But, you know, I think it's part of what made things work better here for me was the change in flute angle as well as the vertical tool angle. I'm going to call out something that you saw me do just a second ago as I was setting up for this blank, which was to spin the blank by hand after positioning the tool rest. And I know we talked about this in the first episode when we were flattening the face, the side of the blank. In that case, it's a pretty low risk of setting yourself up for an impact because you can see the tool rest and the whole face of the bowl at once, and you can kind of get a pretty good sense of whether there's any risk. It's still a good idea to do it there. Here it's really critical because, you know, as I've said several times, we're starting out with a rough blank, irregular, and the fact that you are clearing, the tool rest is clearing the blank on one side is absolutely no guarantee that the other side that you can't even see right now isn't going to run into the tool rest. So it's essential for safety to give that thing a spin. Once you've started to round it down, you'll notice that I often will move the tool rest without even stopping the lathe, and that's fine because now that you've started roughing it down, you have a much better sense of where the edges are. But that very first time, you should absolutely never start the lathe without giving the blank a manual spin. I think it's safe to say that I am finally finding my groove here. Got a nice, clean, smooth cut going. Decent shavings, not great, but with old dry oak, I'm not sure I'm ever going to get really long, curly peels coming off of there. But I tell you what, after struggling for so long with this seemingly simple operation, it sure felt good to be getting a handle on it at long last. And when you think about it, a couple of hours practicing a new skill isn't that much. So I guess I should be happy with the progress. Yeah, I'm thinking maybe I had at this point had even increased the tool angle a little bit more by this point, and boy, it sure is cutting nice. Finally getting some decent shavings there. I think I was happy at that point. Probably should have put that blank aside just like it was and not even turned it into a bowl. Just my first success at rounding one down. So take a look at this one and see if it reminds you of any other blank we ran across today. Yeah, that's a crack. No, this one didn't blow up right when I turned it on. It waited until my hand was right in front of it, and I was lucky to not have that just crush a finger. As it was, it bounced up off the ceiling, it hit the GoPro, and bounced off the ceiling and hit my head. Face mask, didn't draw blood or anything, but I just about had to change my drawers. That was a pretty big chunk of wood. What can I say? I guess I'm a slow learner. On to number 16, and back up to 5X. We're pretty much on cruise control to the finish line at this point. Don't think I have much more to say here. I'll just watch along with you and see if anything jumps out. Here's a big chunk, a little bit irregular. No problem. I think I'm getting the hang of this floating of the bevel. Notice how little tool chatter there is there? And that tool is even more open now. It's at least 1030. Definitely a higher angle for the tool at this point. Little scraping cut there to take the torn fibers off the backside. I really need to work on easing up as I cross the finish line, if you will, and avoid tearing out the fibers there. It generally isn't going to come back to haunt you because you have several more cuts to go that reduce the diameter beyond what those torn fibers are likely to extend into, when I'm shaping the outside of the bowl. But nevertheless, it would be better not to be tearing grain out like that. All right, I'm going to sign off here. We have about half of this blank to go, but I'm going to indulge in a little turning porn here and kick it into slow motion to let you enjoy the shavings coming off this gouge. Catch you next time, and thanks for watching.